The buses rattled down the dusty road carrying an unusual group of captives. These were not infantrymen or officers, but German women, nurses captured alongside retreating units in Italy and France. Their white uniforms were torn, their faces pale with exhaustion. The American guards at the gates straightened as the buses stopped. It was rare to see female POWs, rarer still to see them in military dress. The camp, built to house thousands of men, suddenly felt different as the women stepped down, clutching satchels and blankets. The German nurses lowered their eyes, expecting sneers, insults, perhaps worse. They had been told captivity meant dishonor, humiliation, and danger. Instead, the guards only gestured them forward, their voices firm but not harsh. The women filed through registration, names recorded, belongings searched. Some guards watched with practiced indifference, but others stole glances, unable to ignore the sight of young women among the prisoners. The nurses noticed the stares immediately. It was not anger that filled the Americans' eyes. It was something far more unsettling, curiosity, and in some, unmistakable attraction. A diary fragment later recalled, "I expected cruelty. I expected to be treated like a criminal. Instead, I felt their eyes follow me, not as a soldier, but as a woman. I did not know whether to feel insulted or afraid." For the American soldiers, hardened by years of fighting, the sight of German women, once enemies, now vulnerable captives, stirred emotions they had buried. Their shoulders remained squared, their rifles ready, but their hearts betrayed them with lingering stares. The German women whispered among themselves in hushed tones, "They look at us strangely, not like guards, but like men." Nervous laughter followed, quickly silenced by shame. That first day set the tone for what was to come. The women had expected barbed wire and discipline. They had not expected glances that carried warmth, or soldiers who seemed unsure whether they were guarding prisoners or noticing women. One nurse wrote, "The strangeness was not in their orders, nor in the camp. It was in their faces. They looked at us as though the war had not erased what we were, women, not enemies." That realization was more dangerous than any rifle, for it planted a question neither side could ignore. What happens when soldiers and prisoners begin to see each other as more than captor and captive? The shock of arrival faded, but the unease lingered. Both sides sensed that something forbidden was already taking root. The camp had rules, fences, and discipline, but the eyes of the soldiers betrayed what those rules could never contain. And the German nurses, though they lowered their heads, could not help but feel it too. The following morning, the German nurses lined up for rations, their boots scraping the gravel. They expected the guards to bark, to shove, to remind them they were prisoners. Instead, the atmosphere was strangely calm. At the mess tent, an American soldier handed out bread. When one nurse reached forward, his hand brushed hers lightly, lingering just a moment longer than it should. She pulled back sharply, cheeks flushed. Another soldier, carrying a heavy pot of beans, noticed one of the women struggling with her tray. Without a word, he steadied it for her, nodding as she looked up in surprise. The gesture was simple, but it unsettled her more than hostility would have. A diary later recalled, "I was prepared for blows, for insults, for cruelty. But when he helped me carry the tray, my heart raced. It frightened me more than hate." These small acts spread quickly. A blanket folded more neatly than the others. A tin cup filled just a little higher with coffee. A soldier pausing to translate a word in broken German, his tone softer than orders required. The women noticed everything. Some looked away in shame, refusing the kindness. Others accepted silently, their hands trembling as they held the food or the cup, afraid to admit, even to themselves, how it made them feel. For the Americans, these gestures were dangerous. Regulations demanded distance, discipline, and detachment. But the nurses' presence stirred something they could not bury. Attraction, awkward, unspoken, undeniable. At night, the women whispered among themselves. "He gave me extra bread." Another laughed nervously. Mine folded my blanket carefully. Why would he do this? One stern nurse warned, "Do not be deceived. These are tricks. They wish to confuse us." Yet even she could not hide the way her voice faltered when recalling the soldiers' glances. A diary captured the contradiction. Kindness is harder to endure than cruelty. I could withstand their hatred, but when they smiled, I felt my defenses crumble. The first gestures had been small: food, blankets, smiles. Yet in the tense silence of the camp, they carried more weight than any weapon. Both sides knew it. Something forbidden was quietly unfolding. Not in words, not in declarations, but in the smallest acts that spoke louder than orders. And for the German nurses, the greatest shock was not captivity itself, but the realization that their captors looked at them not only as prisoners, but as women. The first gestures had broken the silence, and soon they would break something much deeper. As the days passed, the German nurses noticed something they could not ignore: the glances. Subtle at first, then longer, bolder, impossible to disguise. While handing out rations, the guards' eyes lingered just a moment too long. While leading roll call, their voices softened when addressing the women. The edge of command replaced with something more human. One nurse whispered to her bunkmate, "They do not look at us as enemies. They look at us as men look at women. That frightens me more than their rifles." A diary fragment echoed the same unease. When I raised my head, he smiled. It was not mockery, not cruelty. It was a smile, as if we were equals. I lowered my eyes quickly, yet I cannot forget it. The soldiers, young and far from home, struggled to hide their own emotions. Some straightened their backs, masking their feelings with harsh orders. Others failed, grins slipping when their eyes met those of the women across the mess line. At the laundry stations, when nurses carried bundles of clothing, guards stepped forward to help, pausing afterward, their eyes lingering as though searching for a connection. The women whispered at night, torn between fear and a dangerous curiosity. One admitted, "His eyes followed me today." I felt ashamed. But part of me was glad to be seen, another warned sharply. "Do not be fooled. This is not kindness, it is temptation, meant to weaken us." Yet even she, in silence, remembered the way a soldier's gaze had softened when she stumbled during roll call. The glances carried weight heavier than words. They revealed what discipline tried to conceal. That attraction had taken root on both sides of the barbed wire. For the German nurses, the greatest shock was not in cruelty or commands. It was in the unmistakable truth they saw in the soldiers' eyes. Desire they dared not name. A nurse later confessed in her journal, "I was no longer invisible. Not only a prisoner." In his glance, I remembered I was still a woman, and that memory terrified me. By then, the glances had become a silent language, one both sides understood. No words were spoken, but the message was clear. The war had made them enemies, but their eyes betrayed something far more complicated. And soon those glances would give way to whispers. When night fell and the lamps in the camp dimmed, the barracks filled with whispers. The German nurses lay on wooden bunks, staring into the darkness, their thoughts restless. One voice broke the silence. "He smiled at me today." Nervous laughter followed, hushed quickly by others who feared the guards might overhear. The women argued softly among themselves. Some warned that the soldiers' attention was a trick meant to humiliate them, to strip away their dignity. Others admitted, almost shamefully, that the kindness in those eyes felt disarming. A diary entry revealed the conflict. My pride tells me to despise them. My heart betrays me when they glance kindly. I do not know which is more dangerous, their rifles or their smiles. One stern nurse, older than the rest, scolded her companions. Do not allow yourselves to feel. We are prisoners, nothing more. To believe otherwise is to dishonor ourselves. Yet her words did not erase the memory of a soldier who had handed her water with gentleness instead of scorn. She turned her face into her blankets, unwilling to admit the warmth that still lingered in her chest. Others, younger and more open, whispered of their confusion. They treat us with order, yes, but not cruelty. Sometimes I forget we are prisoners at all. The barracks divided into two moods, those who clung to pride and suspicion, and those who felt curiosity stirring, dangerous and unfamiliar. One woman confessed in a trembling voice, "When he looked at me, I remembered how it felt before the war, when men looked without hatred. I wanted to cry." The whispers circled deep into the night. Fear, shame, and reluctant laughter mixed in equal measure. None dared speak of love, but all admitted one truth. The Americans saw them not only as captives, but as women. The shock of that realization unsettled them more than barbed wire or guns ever could. By the time silence returned, the women lay awake, torn between denial and a forbidden hope. A diary summed up the unease. We came expecting chains. Instead, we received glances. Tonight, I fear those glances more than the fences that hold us. The whispers in the barracks had begun something none of them could undo. The days in camp fell into a steady rhythm. Roll call, rations, work details. Yet for the German nurses it was not the routines they remembered most, but the small gestures that carried meanings far greater than their size. At mealtime, one soldier quietly slipped an extra slice of bread onto a tray. Another filled a tin cup just a little fuller with coffee before sliding it across the counter. Neither spoke, but their eyes betrayed intent. A diary captured the moment. The bread was nothing, yet it felt heavier than gold. For in his hand I saw not duty but care. I hated that I noticed blankets, too, carried new weight. While most were thrown in rough piles, one guard folded a woolen cover neatly and placed it gently on a nurse's bunk. She froze, staring at it as if it were a forbidden treasure. The women began to whisper about these moments as though they were confessions. He gave me more coffee. Mine adjusted my blanket. The barracks filled with nervous laughter and shame, yet no one denied noticing. The Americans could not entirely hide their attraction. Orders barked in daylight softened into courtesy in private. Their glances betrayed them, and their gestures confirmed what words could not. The nurses felt the weight of each kindness more deeply than cruelty ever could. Hatred was easy to reject. But kindness, unexpected, unearned, slipped past their defenses. One woman admitted quietly to herself, "I despised the war, despised the enemy." Yet when he steadied my arm as I stumbled, I felt warmth I could not deny. It frightened me more than captivity itself. For the guards, too, the struggle was real. They were soldiers first, sworn to discipline. But each small gesture, an extra ration, a softened tone, revealed the truth. Their attraction was growing, despite the fences and rules. The women carried these moments into the night, replaying them in silence. They did not call it love, not yet. But they knew. Something dangerous was taking root between captor and captive. The smallest gestures had become heavy with meaning. Bread was no longer just bread, and a blanket no longer just cloth. They were tokens of something forbidden. And with each passing day, the line between duty and desire grew thinner. The women had expected cruelty. Instead, they found themselves caught in the weight of kindness, which was harder to resist than chains. The small gestures had spoken louder than any words, and soon words themselves would follow. By now, the silence between guards and prisoners had changed. Orders were still given, rules enforced. But in the spaces between, something else lingered, smiles too soft to be hidden. It happened first at the ration line. A soldier handed a nurse her tray, and for just a moment, his lips curved into a faint smile. Not mockery, not cruelty, a human smile. She froze, cheeks warming, before lowering her eyes. Later, at the laundry line, another soldier caught a nurse's glance. He nodded slightly, his grin betraying something he could not speak aloud. She turned away quickly, but her heart raced, ashamed of her own response. A diary recalled, "I told myself it was nothing." A smile, nothing more. Yet in that smile I felt seen, not as a prisoner, but as a woman. That memory clung to me all night, for the Americans too. The smiles were dangerous. Regulations demanded discipline, but their hearts betrayed them in ways their rifles could not control. They smiled without meaning to, then straightened quickly as if to erase the moment. The women whispered in the barracks, "Did you see?" He smiled at you. Nervous giggles followed, quickly hushed, but the whispers carried a warmth that even fear could not suppress. Smiles became silent exchanges, a language both sides understood. No words were spoken, but each grin, each nod, each glance carried more weight than speeches. Some women resisted, turning their heads in shame. Others admitted quietly that the smiles made them feel something long buried, reminders of dances, evenings, and lives before the war. One nurse confessed in her diary, "The war took everything." Yet in his smile I remembered I was still alive, still a woman. It frightened me more than hatred ever did. The camp still held fences, rules, and discipline, but the smiles slipped through every barrier. They revealed what both sides tried to deny. That attraction had grown undeniable. What began as glances was now written on their faces, and smiles, once innocent, had become dangerous confessions neither side could hide. The war had silenced hearts, but now, within the barbed wire, smiles betrayed what words could not, and soon those smiles would turn into whispers. The first words slipped through almost by accident. At the waterline, a soldier filling canteens looked at one of the nurses and said softly in English, "Cold today." She froze, unsure whether to answer. Then, in halting German-accented English, she whispered back, "Yes, cold." Her cheeks flushed, her heart pounding, as though she had broken a law greater than any fence could hold. From that moment, words began to pass quietly between captor and captive. Simple, fragile, almost childlike. "Good?" asked over a tray of food. A faint nod in reply. "Tired?" murmured near the laundry lines. A whispered yes. One nurse recorded the moment in her diary. "I feared his words more than his weapon." For in that single question, I felt a kindness I could not resist. I answered, and in that answer, I betrayed my silence. For the guards, too, the risk was clear. Their superiors had warned them, no unnecessary contact, no familiarity. Yet their lips betrayed them, words escaping in low tones when no officer was near. The women whispered at night about these exchanges. He asked if I was tired. Another responded with a nervous giggle. He told me, "Good morning." Imagine, an enemy greeting me like a friend. Some scolded the others, warning that such moments were dangerous, humiliating. But even those who objected carried the words secretly in their hearts. replaying them in silence long after. A soldier wrote in a letter he never sent, "I am not supposed to speak to them." Yet I find myself asking small things. When she answered, I felt something stir in me, something I thought the war had killed. The camp's fences still stood strong, but language was slipping through the gaps. Each word, however small, carried meaning beyond its syllables, an unspoken admission of attraction neither side dared name. For the nurses, the greatest shock was not in the hunger or the work, but in the realization that their captors chose to speak gently when silence would have been easier. One diary captured it perfectly. Bread fills the stomach. Water relieves thirst. But words touch the heart. And I fear my heart most of all. What began as forbidden glances had now become forbidden whispers. And whispers once spoken could never be silenced again. The camp was no longer only a place of captivity. It had become a place where hearts, against every rule, had begun to speak. By now, the whispers had grown too frequent to remain unnoticed. In the women's barracks, quiet conversations carried stories of soldiers' smiles, soft words, and extra rations. Each tale was met with nervous laughter and sharp warnings. One nurse hissed, "You are fools. If the officers discover this, we will all be punished." But another whispered back, "And yet, when he spoke to me, I felt alive again. Can that be so wrong?" The rumors spread like fire, crossing from the barracks to the guards. American soldiers teased one another, smirking when certain men lingered too long at the gates or stood too close at the mess line. A corporal wrote in his journal, "Some of the boys cannot hide their feelings." I see how they look at the nurses. They risk their careers for a smile. I fear it will end badly. The camp officers began to notice. Orders grew sharper. Guards were warned to maintain discipline, to keep distance. Roll calls were tightened, movements monitored more closely. But no command could erase what had already begun. Glances still lingered, words still slipped out, and the rumors only grew. Some nurses, fearful of shame, scolded the others. "Do not bring dishonor upon us. We are soldiers of Germany, even now." Yet even they could not deny the way their hearts stirred when recalling a soldier's eyes. Others embraced the whispers quietly, even eagerly. They repeated them at night, giggling behind blankets. He gave her coffee. He folded her blanket. He risked a smile. For a moment, war seemed far away. Among the guards, the conflict deepened. Some mocked their comrades, calling them soft. Others envied them, wishing they had been the ones to catch a nurse's glance. A few, stricter still, warned that the line between soldier and man was already breaking. A diary from one nurse revealed the tension. "We fear punishment. We fear shame. Yet the whispers spread among us like a fever. We cannot silence them. Perhaps we do not wish the punishment never came." But the air grew heavy with suspicion. Guards walked with straighter backs. Nurses lowered their eyes more quickly. But in secret, both sides carried the same thought. Attraction had become impossible to hide. The rumors had turned what was once unspoken into a truth everyone knew. And in that truth lay both danger and desire. The camp was no longer silent. It was alive with secrets neither side could contain. By late winter, the fences still held, the rules still bound, but within the camp something had shifted. Affection no longer needed words, it was carried in silence, in gestures too subtle to punish but too powerful to deny. At the mess line, a nurse reached for her tray. The soldier holding it let his fingers brush hers, not by accident, but by choice. Their eyes met for half a heartbeat before she lowered hers, cheeks burning. Another guard, while distributing blankets, paused at one bunk. He placed the cover carefully. smoothing the fold with a tenderness out of place in a prison camp. The nurse turned away, but clutched the wool tightly that night, as though it carried more than warmth. A diary confessed, "There are no declarations, no promises. Only bread, only blankets, only glances. Yet in them I feel something more dangerous than hatred. I feel care." The Americans, too, struggled. They laughed off their own actions, pretending their hands had slipped. Their glances had been accidental, but their hearts betrayed them in ways their discipline could not control. The women whispered in their barracks, replaying the moments endlessly. He touched my hand. Mine gave me more food. These were not grand acts of romance, but for women stripped of freedom, they carried the weight of love letters. One nurse admitted softly, "It is not love. Not as we once knew it. It is something smaller, more fragile. But in these moments, I remember I am still human." Even silence itself became a kind of intimacy. Soldiers who stood guard near the barracks sometimes exchanged no words at all. Only a look, only a nod, enough to make the women's hearts race in the dark. The gestures were fleeting, forbidden, and yet unforgettable. Each loaf of bread, each folded blanket, each passing touch carried the weight of a secret that grew heavier with time. The nurses knew the danger, the soldiers knew the risk, yet neither side stopped, for the silence spoke louder than anything they could have dared to say aloud. One diary captured it simply. In their silence, I heard everything. In their silence, I felt more than I had in years of war. The camp remained a prison, but within it, affection had carved out its own quiet space. Fragile, forbidden, yet real. And though no vows were spoken, no promises made, both sides knew the truth. Something had bloomed in silence that could never be forgotten. The silence had become its own confession, and within it, hearts had spoken louder than words ever could. When the war finally ended, orders came swiftly. The German nurses were to be repatriated, their names checked, their belongings returned. Trucks lined up outside the gates, waiting to take them away from the camp forever. The women gathered their bundles in silence. Some looked down, determined not to glance at the men who had guarded them. Others dared to lift their eyes one last time. A nurse later wrote, "He stood there, rifle in hand, but his eyes said goodbye." I lowered my head, for to return that look would have broken me. The American soldiers, too, stood stiff, their expressions hardened by discipline. Yet behind the straightened backs, their hearts churned. For weeks, they had hidden their feelings in glances and gestures. Now, there was no time left. As the trucks rumbled forward, a few soldiers allowed themselves the smallest of nods. Faint smiles quickly erased when officers turned their heads. The nurses, sitting on wooden benches inside, carried those fleeting looks with them like secret tokens. The journey back to Germany was long, and silence filled the air. Yet the memories would not leave them. The barbed wire, the rations, the roll calls, these they would forget. But the eyes of American soldiers, the forbidden warmth of their gestures, lingered. Some women admitted it years later. We were prisoners, yet we were seen. Not only as enemies, but as women. That memory never left me. Others remained silent for life, ashamed to confess what they had felt in captivity. To speak of it openly was unthinkable. To carry it privately was unavoidable. For the Americans, too, the memories lingered. Some wrote half-finished letters home, never sent, describing kind eyes among the captives. Others buried the thoughts, afraid of what they meant. Historians would later call it paradox, a story of attraction where there should have been only enmity. But for those who lived it, it was more personal. It was the reminder that even in war, the heart does not follow orders. The German nurses returned home scarred by war, but they carried with them fragments of something unexpected, moments of tenderness from the very men they had been taught to hate. For them, the greatest shock of captivity was not in chains, nor hunger, nor shame. It was discovering that even enemies could look at them with warmth, with humanity, and with attraction. The war ended, but the memory did not. Behind the fences of an American camp, in the quiet of stolen glances and unspoken gestures, something forbidden had bloomed. And though they returned to their homeland, those memories remained, haunting reminders that even in captivity, they had been seen not just as prisoners, but as women.